Hi everyone, welcome back to week 2. I know not everyone has watched the first week's video. I recommend that you do watch it because I give you some tips and guidelines on how to succeed in our class. Most of you have participated in the discussion board and replied to others, and it's just nice to begin to see our community of learners beginning to become a little bit closer. I just wanted to give you a brief reminder that we are going into chapter 2 this week. Please make sure, again, let me get my paper here, that you refer back to the course calendar. And if you look at it, then for the second week, we have, you need to read chapter 2, amazing chapter on the brain, fascinating. And then there is, although there are not discussion boards every week, this week we do have a discussion board. First discussion board needs to be posted by Wednesday night. Notice that difference. And then you need to participate 2 more times at least, with a total of 3 times. Again, first post by Wednesday night and then 2 more by Sunday night. Please allow for situations in life that happens, whether you were hoping to do something in the last 2 hours of the day, but then you get called into work, or a child gets sick, or you don't feel well. So my tip is always try to be done 1 day ahead of schedule. That way, if something happens, you have allowed for that problem, even if it's a technical issue. Remember, this class does not accept late work, and it is a requirement statewide. And so be mindful of that and plan accordingly. So chapter 2, when we think in terms about the brain and why is it that we study the brain, for one aspect is that different parts of the brain, they affect different parts of behavior. And another aspect is it's really a lot of the mental disorders that we study and see, a lot of them happen in the synapses, that little gap between the 2 neurons, part of the brain. And therefore we want to understand why the neurotransmitters and the firing or non-firing of the neurons can affect anxiety and depression. And even when we think in terms of panic attacks and schizophrenia, for example, too much dopamine is associated with schizophrenia. Too little serotonin is and norepinephrine connected to depression. Too little GABA connected to panic or anxiety disorders. So that's partially why in psychology we study the brain. And I highly recommend you take the time to read chapter 2 carefully, look at your study guides, and become familiar with it. Also, how do the drugs affect the brain? Because that affects our emotions and affects our behaviors. And so that is one of the aspects as to why we focus on the brain. When we are face to face, I often teach my students the following, which sometimes helps you. If you look at my hand, it would be sort of like a neuron. The fingers are the dendrites. They pick up information from other neurons. Dendrites pick up information. Then the body of the cell, it's where the nucleus is. It's called a soma, the body of the cell. And then the cell has, excuse me, the axon, which carries information away to the other neuron. And right here at the very bottom of my elbow, right here, there are little knobs, little bumps, and we would call them the terminal buttons. Right here, there's a gap, and my other neuron with the dendrites picking up information right here. There's a gap right here, and this gap is called the synaptic gap, or the synapses. It is right here where it becomes a chemical, right throughout the dendrites, and as it comes through the axon all the way here, this is an electrical it travels electrically through the action potential. Right here, when it transmits from the other one, because of the gap, electricity does not cross fluid-filled gaps, then it becomes a chemical continuation. And then once it picks up, it's picked up by the other neuron, then it becomes electrical again. Right here in this gap, that's where a lot of mental problems happen. And so become familiar with the parts of the brain and the structure of the brain, the neurons and the parts of the neurons and their connections with the brain. And around the axon, there's a sausage-like, fatty-like substance called the myelin sheath. MS, myelin sheath. And it is the hardening or the destruction of the myelin sheath that can lead to multiple sclerosis, MS. So again, I find that very interesting for us to know, especially with so many people who suffer from mental illness and also multiple sclerosis. So become familiar with the cell body structure and the signals, the transmissions, and it's right here in this gap too. The Prozac, for example, a very popular antidepressant, acts, and how does it act on it too. So again, I think that's interesting for you to become familiar with some of the neurotransmitters and the cell structure. Okay, this chapter covers way more. It also covers in terms of the plasticity of the brain, how the brain has this amazing capacity to recover and to renew itself. We used to think that years and years and years ago that once the brain has been damaged, that it can't be fixed, and also an old dog doesn't learn new tricks. That is not true in regards to the brain. Brain plasticity, its ability to recover and to learn, and that's why we have just amazing. So make sure you know the concept of brain plasticity. I won't tell you much about the endocrine system, but that's part of the aspects that you need to study on this chapter, and even how the hormones play a part in the endocrine system as well. And so the nervous system is divided in two parts: the central nervous system, the peripheral. Make sure you're familiar with that and why that is important in terms of its subdivisions for behavior, for plasticity, and really sort of it's a chemical part of it with all the hormones as well. So it's important for you to know. Again, make sure you study chapter 2, you take the quiz. Let me take a look here on the calendar. Chapter 2 study quiz. Participate in 3 times on the session 2 discussion board. Again, let me know if you have any questions. My biggest tip: stay one day ahead of schedule. Turn things in ahead of schedule by one day as possible. Have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions.